I'll give you a chance, John. So today we're going to be looking at the work of Marie Trevelyan. And I come across Marie Trevelyan a number of years ago, and it was in connection with Llantwit Place in the Vale of Glamorgan. And I really no idea why Marie Trevelyan comes into Llantwit Place, but we do have five of her books in this house. And she was quite a prolific writer from roughly the late 1880s to the time of her death in the early 1920s. And she was a prolific writer. Her work is wonderful and they're masterful. And those who are fans of King Arthur will be very aware that lots of what people say about King Arthur has almost been researched by Marie Trevelyan in the 1880s, 1890s. So there is a lot that we do know about King Arthur, but if it was known about King Arthur, Marie Trevelyan would have put it in one of her books. And I've got this image in front of us. This is loosely linked to Marie Trevelyan. And it's actually linked to a chap by the name of Edwin Sidney Hartland. Edwin Sidney Hartland co-wrote the last publication I've got here, Folklore and Folk Stories of Wales. Now, I love folklore and folk stories of Wales because there's at least one of these stories from a book on every single one of my walks. We've done walks in about, I don't know how many locations we've done ghost walks, but I think we've done ghost walks in about 25 different locations throughout the area, at least. And one of Marie Trevelyan's stories is in every single one. So her book has been a relative Bible for my work, and maybe I should have been placing her on commission. Now, this is an image of the Rollright Stones, and this isn't in Wales. This is over the border. And the Rollright Stones themselves are associated with one of the stories, English Fairy Tales by Hartland. I do believe you have a blank screen at this minute, but not for long. This says the Land of Arthur. It's not a great image, actually, but lots of the books that we have here are quite gnarled anyway. And we've got the originals. Well, we've got 3 of original books in the house. One is a reprint, and we've got a reprint from the 1920s of Hartland's books. We mentioned Hartland because Marie Trevelyan was inspired to write her books on the back of Hartland's stories about England, really. So this wonderful book, as I open it, The Land of Arthur, it's heroes and heroines. You open the book and immediately you see penciled into one of the pages 1895. So if I sort of blow some of the dust, we can blow some of the dust of the ages out of this book. Wonderful stories in here. And the types of stories in here are associated with Arthur, and there's one in particular story that we could actually go to, but not yet, I may say. I got little post-its in here. They should be coming up straight away, actually. It's in connection with Caraticus, actually. And we've all heard about Caraticus, but this is from Marie Trevelyan's point of view. But I need to give you 1 or 2 more details. So we know that she's writing books in the 1880s, 1890s, all the way up to about 1922. She dies in 1922, actually. She's born in 1853. And her maiden name was actually Thomas. So that's a good start. And she actually had a pen name as well. Emma Mary Paslew, or Paslew, which is quite an unusual name, actually. So we know that she's writing other books as well. And I think she's also a bit of a novelist. The problem is when you look at Marie Trevelyan, you can find her books. you can't find much about her, which is a bit of a shame. But by maybe reading, I'm reading a section out of the 4 books here today, which is, I think, really appropriate. And one book I haven't got with me, which I've done deliberately, is Marie Trevelyan's book on Llantwit Major. Because I think I want to come back to that one. Maybe one of the last lectures that I do in these remaining Ghost series lectures. She does have links with Llantwit Major. So to describe that, as you're going down the old gnarly road into Llantwit Major, on the western approach into Llantwit Major, from the north, you head past the new housing estate on your right, the fairly new one on your left. You keep going down the road, you keep going, it gets narrow, widens out again, get narrow, and just as you're forced to go left or straight onto the town hall, there's an oldie-worldy house, and there's a blue plaque, and the name Marie Trevelyan is picked out on it, which is great. So I think what I'd like to do is go into the land of Arthur. So we've had this image in front of us for a few moments. The images come up slowly today, but John will be very pleased, won't you, John? Because this mentions the Romans.
I recognise that bloke on the horse as well. He's in the Ermine Street Guard.
He's a miserable looking bugger.
Yeah, he is. He's nice to talk to, though. I've had a conversation with him twice.
Nice. Yeah. He could be portraying Aulus Plautius. Now this is from. I'm not going to read the chapter. Chapter 3, in the land of Arthur, is rather too long for me to read out. It goes from. It's nearly 10 pages long, so we're not going to read it all. But this might help us out a little bit. So here we go. The story of Caractacus, or as I usually call him, Caraticus. When Aulus Plautius led his legions westward against the men of the Eslugul, or the Eslug, a name corrupted by the Romans to the word Silures. And there it is on the map. He met by one of the bravest and most intrepid races he had yet encountered. Their commander was no less a person than the celebrated Caradog, the son of Bran the Blessed, better known by his Latinized name as Caractacus, and Rolf Harris's song, The Court of Caractacus, who for 9 years heroically struggled against the enemy. In the Silures, the invaders found unquailing hearts and heroic fortitude. And it was not until AD 50, when Plautius was succeeded in the command by Publius Astorius Scapula, that the Silures were finally conquered, and their brave chieftain was led into captivity. May I interrupt there and interject? I'm not a great fan of Caractacus. Caractacus is seen London way, and then he becomes a hero in Wales. I'm of the opinion that Caractacus never ever got to Wales, but that in a way, this book is talking about another figure, and another figure which has been confused with the Caractacus of London, the figure known as Caradog. They may actually be 2 different people, actually. But that's me being very scientific. But looking about the information as well, looking at this map, what you can see is the word Silures. When the Romans came to the area, they were a bit perturbed by the various names of people, and they wished to put them under an umbrella name, the Eslug, which was very difficult to pronounce, coming out as the Silures. It was quite likely. that the people of Rondevach and Rondebach were called something completely different. And those posh tribal people in the Vale of Glamorgan, a bit like you, Gillian, would have been called by another name. But the Romans just gave them an umbrella name. So let's get on with the story. Caractacus, one of the most celebrated of the British generals or war kings, held so high a place in the esteem of his countrymen that it is stated in the Triads, "The men of Britain, from the prince to the slave, became his followers in their country's need against the progress of the foe and the destruction. And whosoever he went in war, all the men of the island went in his train, and none desired to remain at home. It is strange that a prince, a general, and the greatest hero Wales has ever produced should have had so little recognition in the ancient chronicles of his country. With the exception of brief notices in the Triads, there are few accounts of him, but Tacitus, a Roman writer, has vigorously given him ungrudging praise, which, coming from the side of the enemy, is one of the highest tributes. So in other words, the Romans are writing about these peoples of these lands with a fair tongue. It's a bit of a difference from what I usually say about the conqueror. In William's Cymru, the Y on the end, the selection of Caractacus as general of the British forces is thus described. In a convention of the country, a neighbouring country, under all the limits of the nation of the Cymru, Caradog, the son of Bran, was invested with the martial sovereignty of all the Isle of Britain, that he might oppose the invasion of the Romans. All the Britons, from king to vassal, enlisted under his banner at the call of the country against foe and depredation. Having successfully defended himself for 9 years against the Romans, Caractacus found that he had to urge his forces with fresh vigour to meet the new commander, Astorius Scapula. In many a weary but well-won battle, in many a fierce fray, the men of Eslug, led by their brave general, had fought against the Romans under Aulus Plautius and his subordinate commanders. And when the worst came, neither the smooth promises nor the sharp threats of the enemy deluded or terrorized them. Yet they knew now that the Romans meant to vanquish them, as they had conquered the less heroic tribes, which gladly accepted peace rather than degradation and death or exile, with imprisonment, torture, and martyrdom. Finding the power of the Romans greatly strengthened, Caractacus saw that it was necessary to decide the fate of the Siluria by a single battle. To some, this appeared an unwise policy, but the difficulties of his position were daily increasing. The resources upon which he had to depend were gradually being lessened. And in taking the course he did, he only acted as any other brave general would have under similar circumstances. Alas, Caractacus quitted Siluria, South Wales, for North Wales, the land of the Ordovices, and there selected his own ground, the precise locality of which is much disputed. I can tell you it was around Oswestry, folks. From the description given by Tacitus, the site chosen for the great and eventful battle proves the unswerving excellence of this noble hero's judgment. Tacitus thus writes, He posted himself on a spot to which the approaches were so advantageous to his own troops as they were perplexing to us. He then threw up on the more acceptable parts of the highest hills a rampart of stones, below and in front of which was a river difficult to ford. Picked men showed themselves before the ramparts. Brandon Hill, Coxall Knoll in Shropshire, Cefn Canedd in Montgomeryshire, and Brendan Hill on the banks of the Severn between Shrewsbury and Welshpool are named by the various antiquarians who still agree to differ to the exact spot. Interjection: I've been to Oswestry, could be the site. The great British general did not merely satisfy himself by means of discipline and the advantageous arrangement of his forces, but with the fierce and intense fever of natural heroism, he went rapidly from rank to rank, inspiring his men with courage equal to the occasion, reminding them that on the day's events, liberty and slavery were evenly poised, and either was ready to descend, bringing on the one hand the rapture of victory and the sweet, wild joys of continued freedom, or thus the miserable disgrace of defeat and the wormwood and gale of bondage. The great leader, with all the eloquent powers of a rich language and his proverbial hoil at his command, appealed to the emotions of his brave-hearted warmen. His rhetoric resembled the wild mountain torrents of Wales when, swollen by raging storms, the waters roll thundering downward, casting all obstacles before them. In burning words he spoke of the stinging darts and lashes of oppression, of the grovelling humiliation, but disgrace of the galling yoke of tyranny and the cruel pangs caused by dishonor. He told them too of their wives and daughters, whose beauty was their bane, and whose pure and stainless fame had been tarnished and I can't say the word, lost it, destroyed by ruthless strangers, while held in bondage with fetters of gold in the marble mansions of Roman generals. He reminded them that the Romans, though powerful and mighty, were not invincible. Great Caesar, with all his tact and strategy, had been driven back, and may not the ancient fire of British valor be rekindled with such force that the Romans, quailing before it, would eventually surrender the sea-girt islands to its peace-loving people and brave warriors. The earnest appeal immediately reached the hearts of the Britons, and with one stentorian voice, in grand and solemn acclaim, the whole army, in the face of the sun and the eye of light, responded, promising never to yield weapons or to wounds. Brilliant was the sunrise of the morrow. The river below the British ramparts glittered with golden sun rays, and the broad meadow land sparkled with silvery dewdrops. Beyond and above the river, grim precipices appeared to be shielding dark secrets of warfare, and the gloomy overhanging mountains stretched away into the purple distance like gigantic warmen ranged for the fray. So obviously you've got the Welsh background behind them. We're just going to go on for one more paragraph, and then you'll have to get the rest of the book to read the rest of the chapter. And by the way, you can get hold of this book off the internet for about 15 quid, but the other ones would set you back a few hundred. So I don't know why this you can get hold of this one, but you can get hold of it on Amazon. So it's worthwhile getting hold of a copy. The Romans stood aghast before the formidable barriers their commanders for once quailed when they reached the apparently inaccessible steeps and deeply flowing river. Probably for the first time in the history of the Roman invasion of Britain, the common soldiers had to urge their general to lead the attack. At first, the national cause was highly favoured, and the legions were repulsed with great slaughter. For a time, the Britons triumphantly resisted and actively repelled the enemy, but when fresh troops arrived to support their slain or wounded comrades and replace those that had fallen in battle, the science of military superiority superseded native courage and fortitude. In close combat, the lightly clothed Britons were unequal to the armour-clad Romans, and soon the grand old hosts of Caratacus began to waver. One more paragraph. When the sun slowly sank beyond the western mountains, the Britons were conscious of defeat. And as the purple twilight crept stealthily through the dim glens, rugged ravines, and along the lonely pasture lands of Wales, the warriors of Britain gave way. And that's the type of writing with any book. When you open it, you can find she's very eloquent. The language is very sweet and understandable, and very simple as well. Now we're going to go somewhere else. We're going to see where Marie Trevelyan gets her inspirations. We're going to see why I love Marie Trevelyan's work so much and why I use it. It's because of this chap, Hartland. English fairy tales. And when this arrived first through the door, this was one of Michelle's purchases, I thought, why has she bought this book? It's about England. And then we realized that, you know, there's so many links between English fairy tales and Welsh fairy tales. You can't be without this book now. Edwin Sidney Hartland. Now, that there is actually one of the nice illustrations within the book from the reprint. This is a reprint from the 1920s, and it sure does smell and probably taste like the 1920s as well. But this book's originally coming from 1890. You know, it's one of those inspiring works. So here we go, Hartland. And hang on a minute. Bingo. I thought I had the wrong section then, but I didn't. So this is where the rollright stones comes into it. There you go. I don't know if you've seen them, John, have you?
No.
I was surprised. I'd heard of them before. And here we go. Legend of the rollright stones. Not far from the borders of Gloucestershire and Oxfordshire, and within the latter county, is the pretty village of Rollright. And near the village, up a hill, stands a circle of small stones, and one large stone, such as our Celtic antiquaries say were raised by the Druids. As soon as the Druids left them, the fairies, who never failed to take possession of their deserted shrines, seem to have a special care over these stones, and anyone who ventures to meddle with them is sure to meet with some very great misfortune. Change the image. There they are. Impressive, if I say impressive. The old people of the village, however, who generally know most about these matters, say the stones were once a king and his knights who were going to make war on the King of England. And they assert that, according to old prophecies, had they ever reached Lord Compton, the King of England must inevitably have been dethroned, and this king would have reigned in his place. But when they came to the village of Rollright, they were suddenly turned into stones in the place where they now stand. Be this as it may. Do you know what? I love that. Be this as it may. There was once a farmer in the village who wanted a large stone put in a particular position in an outhouse he was building in his farmyard. And he thought that one of the old knights would be just the thing for him. Oh, he's going to move one of the stones. In spite of all the warnings of his neighbours at Rollright, he determined to have the stone he wanted, and he put 4 horses to his best wagon and proceeded up the hill. With much labour, he succeeded in getting the stone into his wagon, and though the road lay downhill, it was so heavy that his wagon was broken and his horses were killed by the labour of dragging it home. Nothing daunted by all these mishaps, the farmer raised the stone to the place it was to occupy in his new building. You can only guess what's going to happen. Actually, I don't know what's going to happen, actually. It's exciting. From this moment, everything went wrong with him. His crops failed year after year. His cattle died one after another. He was obliged to mortgage his land and to sell his wagons and horses, till at last he had left only one broken down horse, which nobody would buy, and one old crazy cart. I think I can guess what's going to happen. Suddenly the thought came into his head that all his misfortunes might be owing to the identical stone which he had brought from the circle at the top of the hill. He thought he would try to get it back again, and his only horse was put to the cart. To his surprise, he got the stone down and lifted it into the cart with very little trouble. Just think about it. Probably weighed about 2 tons. And as soon as it was in, the horse, which could scarcely bear along its own limbs, now drew it up the hill of its own accord with as little trouble as another horse would draw an empty cart on level ground, until it came to the very spot where the stone had formerly stood beside its companions. The stone was soon in its place, and the horse and cart returned home. And from that moment, the farmer's affairs began to improve, till in a short time he was a richer and more substantial man than he had ever been before. That is a lovely story. Feel sorry for the horses and the cattle, but really nice story, that. And if anyone wants to find the Rollright stones, let's find out where they are. So if we, hang on a minute. I'm trying to move my little, oh, hang on. I've seemed to have lost my images a minute. Hang on a minute. Let's just go back. You're probably still seeing it. I'm just going to do something a minute. There's me wanting to do something technical and it all goes wrong. Hopefully the image is back up again. Is it, John?
Yes.
Right. I was going to look. So obviously you can see that red patch. It's on the border between Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire. And the lovely Rollright stones, as we've seen, it would be the type of place it would make a brilliant visit, actually, because They do look very delightful. So what I'm going to do now, we've got this little publication in front of me. There it is. From Snowdon to the Sea. And when I first looked at this, I thought, am I going to find anything worthwhile for my ghost stories in the Vale of Glamorgan? And this one's dated from 1894, actually. Oh, and by the way, they're all dedicated to somebody, actually, these books. This one's dedicated to the Right Honourable Lord Windsor. It's very important to Glamorgan. And the first one that we looked at, The Land of Arthur, is actually dedicated to the memory of Llewellyn ap Griffith, the chap I seem to mention every single Wednesday. So from Snowdon to the sea. Thought this was a very strange story, actually. But I'd never heard of it before, actually. It's not many pages long. So, but I'm not going to read all of it, actually. But if you try to get hold of this one, it's going to set you back a couple of pennies. Just like to mention as well about From Snowdon to the Sea, back to what I said. So is this going to be relevant? And you start to go through it. And there's lots of Malta Noss, if anyone's aware of the coastline. Malta Noss is a very interesting story, and Colin Dolphin, and I thought, very interesting. And then we come across a story in regards to Peterston, Super Ely in the Vale of Glamorgan. And I thought, fantastic. This is where we are now, a flooded Peterston. But it does mention other places as well. So let's give it a little bit of a go. Mentions Bonvilston. The Ghost of the Gatehouse. Jack, the stable boy at the old farm, had been asked to do something very strange, and he puzzled his head as to what the world was coming to. But having promised to remain silent, he kept his word. His master, Meredith Gwynn, told him to saddle the roan mare Ruby as soon as the old master was safely in bed, and to say, "Nothing to nobody." The old gentleman farmer, who was also a justice of the peace, seldom retired much before midnight. And it was about 12:15 when the young master appeared, booted and spurred, with hunting crop in hand, and fully dressed for riding. Jack thought, uncommon odd for the young farmer to be going off like that between 12 and 1 in the morning. The mare's in splendid trim for a long ride, ventured Jack, as his master mounted. Hold your tongue, will you? Said Meredith Gwynn, in a rough whisper. Wasn't quite that. As he gave a piece of silver to the boy. Don't say a word to anybody. He must be going off to see a woman, surely to be. Right, sir, said Jack, touching his cap. Now lead the mare quietly out, said Meredith. And when I'm gone, see that the gate is shut. Be here again at 4 to the minute. Quite precise time, that. Right, sir, said Jack, who after his young master had gone, turned into the stable room and began to muse. Perhaps he's in love, he murmured to himself, but 'tis an odd time to go courting. After speculating for more than half an hour, Jack fell asleep, but was awakened by the thought that his master must be admitted as quietly as he made his exit. So he rubbed his eyes, began to think of his sweetheart, who was the prettiest girl in the village, or for that matter, in the whole of the Vale of Glamorgan. It was 4 o'clock in the starlight morning when Meredith Gwynn returned home and gave his horse into Jack's charge. "Not a word," said the young master. "Right, sir," repeated Jack. At the same time, he had his thoughts. He observed that Ruby was covered with mud and bespattered even to her eyes. He then remembered that Master Meredith looked as though he had been out hunting in the worst of weathers, a bit like tonight, really. "It's a rum go," muttered Jack in his own rugged way. The morning passed and breakfast time came. "They're half to sleep," said Will Morris, the general man, to Jack. "I kept awake half the night," was the reply. "I had the rheums that bad." Rheumatism or something. "Who left the hayloft door open last night? I should like to know," continued the old man. "I didn't," said Jack. "Nor did I," remarked Will, with something like a nasty jeer. After breakfast, the old man went to the stables, and when there, called Jack to him. "Take thee care," said Will Morris, "that thee'st got nothing to do with Rebecca and her daughters, or as sure as I be alive, I'll be the death of thee." Will Morris, the general man at the old farm, was Jack's uncle, and therefore felt he had right to do as he liked with the lad. "I've never had any dealings with Rebecca and her gang," said Jack sulkily. And he knew that Rebecca was what he heard first-hand in the old farm from his uncle, or second-hand in the village from the idlers. While the master of the old farm and his family were seated at dinner, the news came that one of the turnpike gates near Peterston had been destroyed and the gatehouse was burnt to the ground. So we can work out that this story must be around the 1800s time, when they got those toll gates, when you got the Rebecca and the Risings and all the rest of it, probably up to about the 1830s. So sort of talking about this. So this wasn't that old when Marie Trevelyan's writing it down. A few minutes later, the gatekeeper himself came and asked to see the farmer and magistrate. "Bring him in here," said Mr. Meredith, who was too eager for news to wait until after dinner. "Well, what about it, Daniel?" asked Mr. Meredith. "It did happen like lightning," said Daniel. "They did ride up, 30 or 40 of them, all in women's dresses." I could play that role, couldn't I? "And their faces was as black as the chimney backs, as they did lay hold on me, and carry me off to the blacksmith's shop. And there they did keep me, while they did break down the gate and did burn the house to the ground. Daniel, having delivered his message, went his way." "It's bad business," remarked the master, after the old man had taken his departure. "Something must be done to put a stop to it. But what can be done bothers my head." Day by day, the demolition of the toll gates increased. Brutality was frequent, and occasionally murder was committed. The toll gates were set up so that people could tax anyone wandering along their road. So you'd have a toll gate, you'd pay a toll, and at the other end, you'd pay another toll. That's what the toll gates were. They were a way of taxing people, and that money was meant to be paid into repairing roads and stuff. One morning in December, news reached Peterston that all along the main coach road from Carmarthen upward, the gates were being destroyed, and said havoc was wrought. People in terror bolted and barred their doors, barricaded their windows, and prepared for the coming of Rebecca and her daughters. So we weren't talking about Rebecca and her daughters, i.e., those people dressed up. That's what we're referring to at the beginning of the story. The Rebecca Risings. This is what this is talking about. Children, almost frightened to death, cowered in safe corners, and women whimpered and turned pale with fright. "It's cruel times," said their quiet men, who felt it their duty to leave work and stay at home to protect the women. the children and the helpless ones. All along the main road from Cowbridge to Cardiff, people were ready to receive Rebecca and her daughters. The gatehouses were fortified as best they could be, and the keepers thereof, while still remaining true as possible under the circumstances to their post, acted as a rule upon the principle of the man who sang, "He who fights and runs away will be able to fight another day." So in other words, if a large group of people come into your toll gate to burn it, run off, and then you can fight for another day. And do you know what? I would like to talk more from this little bit, right? And we'll just go on for a little bit further. But there are quite a few more pages, so we're not going to do it all. But we'll go to the bottom of this next page. In the dead of night, the Cowbridge toll gate was destroyed, and tired after arduous work, Rebecca and her minions disbanded for what they called a few days' rest. Where they went, nobody knew. Well, they could go anywhere, couldn't they? They were dressed as women, so nobody's going to recognize them. I'll tell you a little thing in a minute and make you laugh. Nobody knew, but even these riotous ladies needed a little respite, and naturally nobody begrudged it them. People only wished they would always rest and never resume their occupation. Those who waited in the neighborhood of the next toll gate, that of Bombleston, shivered in their shoes, for they knew well that Rebecca would soon be with them. The day after the demolition of the Cowbridge toll gate was bitterly cold. It had been freezing for days, and the leaden sky promised snow. Pedestrians were glad in turn were glad to turn into the Old Post, a well-known and ancient hostelry near Bombleston, on the main road between Cardiff and Cowbridge. Travellers driving gave their horses a feed, and meanwhile went in and warmed themselves a while before continuing the journey westward to Cowbridge or eastwards to Cardiff. Conversation naturally turned to the tyranny of the turnpikes, though people felt that Rebecca went too far in injuring harmless gatekeepers and frightening innocent women and children. "I got to pay 6 turnpikes for I can get a pennorth of coal," grumbled a coal vendor present. "And what's more, I do pay 8 turnpikes for I can sell a bit anywhere." So these turnpikes were terrible things. And I'd like to say 2 things. I was stopped in the street the other day, and somebody recognized me from Casualty when I was dressed up as a woman who played Dorothy. And they said, "Look, mate, don't take it personally, but you look better. You look better as a woman in Casualty." How am I supposed to take that? Anyway, and actually, I've got the pleasure to say I played I played a role in regards to this rebellion as well, and it sort of shivers you down to the bone that when you're playing history, you feel as if you're part of it. And a rather interesting story that they tell you history in the way that it's put into a storybook form. The Rebecca riots immortalized in From Snowdon to the Sea. Do you know what I'm reminded? I did actually do some, there is something of this lecture that we're missing. So I'm going to go all the way to the beginning a minute. And you know what? I can't find those images. But I was going to talk to you. Ah, there it is. I got it. It was hiding. There's another publication. It's called Arthurian Legends by Marie Trevelyan. Now, I think Dell might be interested in this one. It has been reprinted, Dell, and I think there's about 30 odd quid a book. But this is a rather interesting book. And as I said at the beginning, lots of what we do associated with King Arthur might be found in the land of Arthur, or might be found in Arthurian legends written also by Marie Trevelyan. And when we look at this book, the contents are as follows. The rich and romantic folklore of the land of King Arthur. King Arthur stands preeminent among the heroes of Britain. Marie Trevelyan immortalizes King Arthur. Places and objects bearing his name abound in Wales and Cornwall, and his legend is still as fresh and vigorous as ever. And vigor is the operative word there. This fascinating book reveals the rich history and folklore of the land of King Arthur, the legends of King Arthur, the heroes that lived before him, and the adventures of those that followed. Includes Arthur, the warrior king, King Arthur's court, the exit of Arthur, Merlin the seer, Queen Guinevere, Boa, semi-mythical heroes Llud, and other early monarchs, the story of Caractacus, the advent of the Normans. So if anyone's interested in that type of thing, try and get hold of a copy. Amazon, 30 quid. Write the title down. Arthurian Legends. And I haven't mentioned it as I'm getting to the end of the lecture now. And that book that I've got a reprint of, I looked up folklore and folk stories of Wales. Not much change of £200, so it's a bit out of my pocket. Again, going through Peterston, and this book here, it's got the dragon on it, and it's in the background as well. Oh, wouldn't I love to get hold of a copy of this book? But then again, I've got a copy of the book, so there you go. Folklore and folk stories of Wales. Lovely. Just like to mention, again, she was born in 1853, died in 1922. Another book, 2 books missing. There's actually lots of titles that I could have mentioned today. There's quite a list of them, actually. But you won't, it's very difficult to get a definitive list of all the books. Here we go. Glimpses of Welsh Life and Character, 1893. Britain's Greatness Foretold, the story of Boudicca, the British warrior queen, 1910. Well worth visiting some of those books. And what we must do is the Gracker ribbon. I wanted to do the water horse actually, but I think we've learned enough about her or it. And we will look at the Gracker ribbon. And thank you for the cup of tea, Michelle. I'm going to have a slurp. That's lovely. Right. Gracker ribbon, page 65. The Gracker ribbon resembled the Irish banshee. Welshmen say this night hag never troubles new families. Lucky for some. Only those with ancestors have for long generations lived in the same place. In other words, the old stock she was interested in. You'll be okay, John. You weren't brought up in Wales, so you're fine. But Del,
lucky, really.
You're screwed. This spectral form is described as having long black hair, black eyes, and a very odd countenance. Sometimes one of her eyes is grey and the other black. You see lots of dogs and horses like that. Both are deeply sunken and piercing. Her back was crooked. Her figure was very thin and spare. I've never come across the word spare in that context. My granddad used to say there's nothing wrong with a bit of spare. And a pigeon breasted bust was concealed by a somber scarf. Her trailing robes were black. She was sometimes seen with long flapping wings that fell heavily at her sides, and occasionally she went flying down along watercourses or around hoary mansions. Hoary old mansions. Frequently, the flapping of her leathern bat-like wings could be heard against the window panes. If you hear her against your window panes, Dell, it's time to count your minutes. St. Donat's Castle on the seashore of Glamorgan has always been inhabited since the coming of the Normans into Wales, even though occasionally it was not in the owner's occupation. The Stradlins were holders of it from Norman times until the middle of the 1700s, when it was the subject of a romantic lawsuit which lasted over 50 years. The heir of the Stradlin family went on a tour with his friend Llantwit, and before starting, it was agreed, Before starting, it was agreed by the two men that if during their travels anything should befall the other, the survivor was to inherit the deceased estate. Both were rich and their estates valuable. In the meantime, the father of Thomas Stradlin died, and the absent heir came into possession of the St. Donat's estate. In 1738, Thomas Stradlin was killed in a duel at Montpellier in France, and Llantwit of Wiltshire, according to agreement, became the owner of St. Donat's. The Stradlin family believed the rightful heir had been the victim of foul play and laid claim to the possessions. During the long years of litigation, the Llantwits let the castle in succession to highly respectable people, from the descendants of whom many stories of the place have been obtained. Here we go. And I would like to say that lawsuit as well led into it nearly bankrupting the Llantwit and the St. Donat's estate. They went on for 50 years. One of the longest lawsuits the country has ever seen. It all went out on paying lawyers. In the law connected with the castle, the Gracha ribbon appears. One night early in the 1800s, a stranger who was visiting the family residence in the castle distinctively heard a moaning and wailing sound close under his window. It was like the pitiful sound of a woman in the greatest possible agony. The visitor ventured to look out, but was alarmed by the flapping of wings against the lattice and a rattling noise like that of talons. In the morning, he told his host and hostesses of his experiences, and they said it was the Gracha ribbon who always frequented the castle, and lamented the death of the last of the Stradlings in the direct line. They said that sometimes this mysterious figure wandered through the empty and silent rooms of the disused part of the castle, and the sounds of the lamentation were enough to turn one's blood to ice. Once the Gracha ribbon traversed the village from end to end, and in the dim, uncertain twilight of a November evening, her flowing robes and outstretched arms were against the wind and caused a roaring noise. She was once seen beating the boundaries of the whole estate, and was accompanied by black hounds with red eyes and horrible fangs. Similarly, we go to Pennard Castle. Near a small creek that runs into the land from Oxbridge Bay stand the ruins of Pennard Castle, which was built on the site of a stronghold of Danish Vikings. The castle was a property of a Norman lord, and the old story goes that it was built in a single night by a Welsh sorcerer, who in this way saved his life from threatened imprisonment and assassination by the damnable Normans. Around this castle, the Gracha River often wandered and was seen and heard by people as late as the 1850s. People along the countryside used formally to say that if anybody slept for the night among the ruins of Penad Castle, he would be bewitched. It was solemnly stated that centuries ago a man once slept in the ruins after being told not to do so. Rolling my eyes. During the night, the Gracha Ribbon attacked him violently and almost left him for dead. And we know what the word attack means when you're attacked by a female ghost in a castle, don't we, Amy, without repeating any more. He was found in the morning quite unconscious, with his bruises on his body, scratches upon his face, and other evidences of maltreatment on his nether regions. When he came to himself, he described the terrible appearance of the hag who attacked him and said she clawed him just as an eagle might have done. Then she pecked at his body and beat him. The man went home to Carmarthen and ever afterwards was bewitched, as the people near Penad Castle said he would be for all time. And you know what? To finish this one, let's mention Beaupre Castle in the Vale of Glamorgan. do you know what, right? I have been doing ghost walks since I've been doing ghost walks since 2015, right? And I have done so many, and I've not once mentioned Beaupre Castle. It's a fascinating place. Amazing. On the banks of the River Thor, near Cowbridge, become uninhabitable. I can't get these words out. Nobody's living in it. In the 1700s was a residence known as New Beaupre was erected. It originally belonged to the Welsh Cecil family. I can get that word out. From whom the present Lord Salisbury is said to be descended. The family name Cecil being a corruption of Cecil, Beaupre was restored by the Normans and descended by heirship to the Bassett family, who came into possession about the year 1200. Later on, it was sold to the Edmonds family and subsequently to the Trehans of St. Hilary, from whom it was bought by a solicitor. During the Edmonds' ownership, and while the Trehans possessed the castle, the Gracha Ribbon frequented the place. There was an old story, prevalent, that the hag had been seen rising up out of the River Thor and wringing her hands and flapping her bat-like wings in the twilight. She also seemed to have a grievance against New Beaupre. There's Old Beaupre and New Beaupre, if anyone doesn't know that. For late in the 1700s, she was seen and heard in the grounds. Early in the 1800s, workmen staying in the neighborhood declared they had seen the Gracha Ribbon among the ruins of the old castle, Beaupre Castle, not New Beaupre. And the wailing and sobbing were painful to hear. Soon all the neighborhood rang with the story, and as time passed, the hag became more persistent. When the solicitor bought the estate, he heard the story of the Gracha Ribbon and was much interested in it. A year or two before this owner's death, the following story was told by an old man in the Vale of Glamorgan. And on that one, I've told that story time and time again. So what we're going to do We're going to find out if there are any questions. And John, I'm going to have a slurp while you have got the mic. Go for it, John.
Right, okay. How did you know I was going to ask a question? Anyway, I got Caractacus and his supposed association with the Silures. I'm not so sure because there was never any recorded conflicts as such.
That's right.
With the Romans. And I think the Romans were quite happy with how things went for them with the Silures and in South Wales, and that's why they didn't stay so very long in Caerleon. They weren't there very long at all before they went further north. And so why?
Well, this is John. You've said everything that I could say about that point, and I agree with you. I think what we're doing here is I think Marie Trevelyan may have got two figures mixed up. Caradog and Caractacus, similar sounding names. But there is no evidence, as you've said, of any major conflicts throughout the area. And without insulting anything in these books, where there's myths and legends, there's facts waiting to be told, and it's interpretation, which is very important. And one thing, and I think we won't say any more about that point, John, but what I'm going to say is this. The Gracker Ribbon is a very unusual story. And I've never had this thought in my head. Why is that story told? It's nothing to do with the St. David story. St. David said that you were to be given a candle, a corpse candle, to warn you that you're going to die in 3 weeks, right? And it's time to prepare. I'm sure everyone on this planet would love to have that warning. You'd be able to say goodbye to everybody. You'd be able to get your affairs in order. Brilliant. Or you could go on the piss for 3 weeks, right? But it's nothing like that. The Gracker Ribbon is a very strange story and a very this neck of the wood story. And I think maybe looking into stories more is the course of where you need to go. Okay, John, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put everybody's mics on, and I'm going to actually say I actually thoroughly enjoyed that today. I'm supposed to be asking you guys that. So Del, undo your mics. Del, you go first.
I enjoyed that as well. That was fascinating. Learned quite a few new things, especially about sort of the local area. Yeah, good.
That flowed really well, actually. Yeah. Sophie, were you going to say something else, Del?
No.
Excellent. Sophie, babes.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say?
I enjoyed it. It was really interesting.
It was good. Yeah, go on.
No questions, just
okay.
Good.
when there's no questions, you've usually answered them all. Gillian.
Yeah, it was good, and I might try and get one of her books.
Right. So obviously, I think, as I say, type in The Land of Arthur, right, on Amazon, Marie Trevelyan. Type in From Snowdon to the Sea, but Snowdon to the Sea is quite expensive, or I may have got it the wrong way around. You're not going to get hold of an original folklore and folk stories of Wales for much change of 150, 200 quid. But you can get hold of a copy for maybe 20 quid, 30 quid. Well worth that. And actually, I don't know, I think when Michelle bought English Fairy Tales by Hartland, I don't think that was very expensive at all. I think that was like 11, 12 quid. It might be worth you getting that. It's not really, if you're not really interested in English folk stories, you don't get it for that. You actually see the links with the Britishness and the flow of stories. So yeah, get a hold of one. And last question, Amy.
Hello. Really good. I love the story about the Gracker ribbon. I remember when we were in Southern Down and we were telling it, and we were in the pitch dark, and it was the first time I heard that story. And I remember seeing red lights in the trees and pooping myself a little bit.
The Gracker ribbon is a very frightening story, and you know, when I said we know the other story, that's the story that I told in the woods, and let's not spoil that.
No, we won't.
We won't. So I've really enjoyed this tonight. Do you know what? I've been too into doing the research and everything for this this week. Oh yeah, next week we're going to be doing a subject that I have never done in regards to a ghost walk, even though it's my own hometown. We're going to do ghost stories associated with Barry and maybe a bit about Porthkerry, which is, and do you know what? The reason why I'm loath to do it is because all 3 walks that we've planned to do ghost walks in Porthkerry, we've had to cancel in Barry. We have never ever done one. And I'm hoping things will go well for next week. Okay, make those sacred spaces work, and we'll be able to do next week. So if there's no more questions anyone would like to ask, I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to chuck the towel in. I'll be seeing lots of you in the week. Make sure you're with us on Wednesday, Gillian, and if anyone else wants to join us on Wednesday, Del and John and so on. Everything's flowing. And for those that don't know, I think it's the 13th of September. We've got a walk, which is going to be in Llantwit Major, which is in the day on a Friday. Oh no, Sunday, actually Sunday. And then we've now got a community support officer who will be going around with our little library once a fortnight. So more about that in the future. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to call it a night. Thank you very much. I'm not going to ask if you've enjoyed yourselves tonight, but if you have, let's all have a round of applause, and including me. Oh, that was good. Good. That was good.
I just check that I've got the name right. Is it Roll Right Stones?
Roll Right is one word. Roll, R-O-L-L, right, one word. Roll Right Stone. Look it up. And actually, that can be your homework for next week. Homework for next week. And actually, your homework, Amy, is to try to work out the Gracker ribbon a bit more. And what were you going to say, Gillian?
Yeah.
Did you say the 13th of September?
Yes, Sunday.
Walk.
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay.
You decided to go to China on that day. It's not my bloody fault. Anyway, so if there's no question, if anyone wants to ask anything at the end, they can. But if not, I'm going to say good night to Del, Gillian, John, Amy, and Sophie, and good night,
all.
people.
See you all.
Night, guys.
Good
Night.
night.
Diolch yn fawr chi. Night.
Jambo Buana Moriaco.
Diane, John, and John, you were a star tonight, and actually, I think Gillian will. Gillian and Amy will agree. John, you've been really well behaved tonight. Well done.
Yeah.
Well done, John.
No star.
No star. No star chi.
Jambo
Croeso.
Oh.
I think he was talking
There you
French
go.
then. Anyway, Amy, I'm going to dash. If anything you want to say quick.
I was going to say, just it was a request for Halloween. Will we be doing